The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that of employer and hired laborer. These words were taken directly from General Order Number 3, the Emancipation Proclamation delivered in Galveston by Major General Gordon Granger on July 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Absolute Equality is the title of the Juneteenth Legacy Project mural underway in downtown Galveston. Today, we welcome Samuel Collins III, who's co-chairing this project. Sam will speak to us about the mural, its significance, as well as its place and the plans for this year's celebration and dedication. Sam Collins was born in Galveston, Texas in 1971, 50 years ago today. Today, he grew up in Hitchcock with his mother and grandparents and spent time in Galveston with his father's family. Sam graduated from Texas A&M University. And in 2005, Sam and his wife purchased the Stringfellow Orchards after he saw a historical marker on the road. Since then, he has endeavored to restore the property and highlight the history of African Americans who worked in the orchards following the Civil War. Sam has also been involved in the Juneteenth celebrations, both in Galveston and Hitchcock, and other preservation efforts in Galveston County. It's with pleasure that we introduce Sam Collins.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm so glad to be with you this morning on this beautiful 50th birthday of this amazing individual that God has allowed to journey this path we call life together with each of you. This moment is special for so many reasons. And I just sound like I just heard my wife chime in when they said Miss Collins. I saw her light up there. I don't know if she, please mute that. I don't think she knew she had that unmuted. Thank you. So back to where I was at. So it's so wonderful today. I want to thank my dad. I don't know if he's chimed in yet, but my dad, a little over 50 years ago, was walking around the tennis courts, and he saw my mother playing tennis, and he thought, what a intelligent, beautiful individual. And shortly thereafter, I appeared. So I want to thank y'all for having me this morning. I want to get right into our presentation because I don't want to delay. Let me see if I can share my screen. It says host disabled, participant screen sharing. So if you could give me permission for just a second to share a screen.
Yeah, Sam, I'm sorry. I didn't set you up to begin with, but I'm going to find you right now.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll go and start with my speech. Juneteenth celebrates the evolution of our country to a more perfect union. And one of the things that I heard, she said July 19th, but it's actually June 19th, 1865. And that's happened to me. I've said that date. So it's
there
just
you go.
a tongue. So, all right, let me see if I can get into my presentation here. And hopefully now everyone can see the screen. So the Juneteenth Legacy Project, this is a project at the intersection southwest corner of 22nd and Strand, where the Union headquarters was located in 1865. So often people have heard me tell the story about history is like a green salad. The lettuce and tomato are the stories that you hear all the time about the founding fathers and early settlers, but the salad includes croutons, bell peppers, hot peppers, sliced onion, and these things add more flavor. So this morning, I'm gonna try to flavor up this Galveston history salad. So many of us know the date, 1865, which was the end of the Civil War and freedom for the enslaved people of Texas. General Lee had actually surrendered on August 9th, 1865. I mean, April, see how quickly you can say the wrong month, April 9th, 1865. And, but Texas refused to surrender. So it wasn't until a little over 2 months later that the enslaved people of Texas found out they were free. But what many individuals don't know about this story is that the Union forces were losing at Appomattox until the United States colored troops showed up to provide some aid to them. They too were Union soldiers, but their regiments were titled United States colored troops because of segregation at that time. After helping the Union forces at Appomattox, they were then ordered to Texas to bring Texas back into the Union. 75% of the Union forces that came into Texas were United States colored troops. Here we have a newspaper report, July 7th, about General Gordon Granger and issuing General Order Number 3, which involves an equality of personal rights and rights of property. So when we think about absolute and equality, the definitions of those two words, you would think equality would have been enough, but Major Frederick Emory, who actually wrote General Order Number 3 and signed General Order Number 3 under the command of Granger, I believe included those words absolute equality, because prior to the war, he had been an editor for an abolitionist paper in Texas. General Order Number 2, he set up command in.
Sam, your audio is intermittent. Sam, I'm not hearing any audio.
For a while, I was actually somewhat embarrassed by the fact that Galveston did not have a subject marker, so I went out, seek donors. We raised $1,900. I specifically went to African-American residents and citizens because I felt like this was something we needed to pay for ourselves. And the state of Texas had an undertow marker program, but I didn't want to apply. I felt like we could raise $1,900. That was in 2012. The marker was placed in the ground on June 19, 2014, and there was a Juneteenth marker celebration on June 21st, 2014, kicking off a year-long celebration for the sesquicentennial 150th anniversary of Juneteenth. So that is located at 22nd and Strand. So behind the marker was this blank wall. So last summer, I read a guest column by Sheridan Lorenz. I reached out to her by email. We began talking about things on the island and what we could do to improve life on the island. And there was a mural that was painted on 39th and M. And it just got more of my creative juices flowing that we need more positive imagery in Galveston. And I proposed to Sheridan that, hey, you got this blank wall. This is where we need to tell the Juneteenth story. She bought into it immediately, and we started to work on it. So as I talked earlier about the United States colored troops, here's a book, Like Men of War. In it, you will see a list of all of the USCT regiments that came into Texas. There were thousands of soldiers that came into Texas. And there are letters in this other book, A Grand Army of Black Men. By January of 1866, General Sheridan numbered in his Lone Star contingent at 6,500 white soldiers and 19,768 black ones. This is an important part of this Juneteenth story and this legacy project. Too often we focus on the suffering of slavery and we sensationalize the suffering for profit or monetary reasons with regards to museums that or movies that kind of glorify this pain. But what we do not do as a society is we did not celebrate these patriots and freedom fighters. these men that took up arms for themselves to fight for freedom for not only their self, but their families, and to save the Union. If it was not for these United States colored troops that joined the Union forces, the Union forces may not have won the Civil War, and we could be living in a very different reality right now. But these individuals, some of them began to run away before the war started. Some of them began to go to Union sides in 1861 when the war started, because at that time, if they made it to Union sides, they were considered contraband because they were property of the enemy. Therefore, the United States would not return the property to the Confederacy, and they kept them. In addition to their physical presence, they had intellectual knowledge of the territory of the South and of other information that was critical to the Union receiving victory, because they had lived in the South. So those that ran away and made it to Union sides, they were able to provide information that the Union forces otherwise would not have had. There were also freedmen that took up arms. And even though when you watch the movie Glory, you have this idea that all of these men were untrained and they needed to be taught everything, many of them had already been preparing to fight for their freedom. And many of them were already trained. And then they helped to train others that needed to be trained. So Hollywood kind of twists that story a little bit. So it's important to go back to primary source documents, letters from the actual soldiers and from the military reporting how these men fought gallantly to save the Union. So they were not just sitting idly by waiting to be rescued. They fought for their own freedom, and they came into Galveston. And newspaper reports at that same time from July of 1865 says Galveston is now occupied by Negro troops. If you go down into the Tribune's report from the Telegraph that came out on the 20th of June, it says Galveston is now occupied by colored troops constituting a provost guard for the enforcement of law and order. So this sketch was first done by a young artist named Chase Sampe. I wanted her to have Granger sitting with the soldiers standing as men because they were men. They were not property. They are human beings. They fought, and it took everybody. So some people have seen the imagery of the mural and think that Lincoln is too prominently featured or Granger is too prominently featured. It took all of them to help save the Union. So they're all important. They're all in this history salad. And this American house that we live in was built on a cracked foundation, and we have to do the work to repair the foundation so that future generations don't have to deal with the cracks in the wall and the problems of a house with a bad foundation. So as we start to reimagine monuments and memorials and tell a more complete story of our shared history, we will do the repair work necessary to save the house for future generations. If not, a generation will rise up and tear the house down and build over. That's what revolution and revolt is about. Once they realize the foundation can't be fixed, that's a threat to the house. But I believe that we live in a great country, in a great state, in a great county, in a great city, but that does not mean that we can't improve. There's always room for improvement. We are not perfect, but June 19th represents a day that helped us move to a more perfect Union. So one of the things that we had to do is get a rendering of the drawing done to get it approved by the Landmark Commission. So the artist, Reginald Adams, gave us this sketch. After Chase's sketch, I gave him Chase's sketch. He built on that and created these portals. So we have heard the 1619 date, but Galveston's history goes back to 1528 with the first non-native enslaved person to arrive here, Esteban, some refer to as Estenvinico, and his name before becoming enslaved was Mustafa. So he arrived shipwrecked here in Galveston in 1528. In the imagery, you will see an Olmec sculpture in South America to represent African presence in the New World prior to Columbus. and prior to America or the United States. You have the middle passage up in the top left corner. And you also have imagery of the Africans selling other Africans in the bottom left corner, because this is part of the story. We did not want to ignore this piece. We want to embrace the full history and teach the full history. Harriet Tubman is in the second portal there. She never came to Texas, but she's an iconic figure that many people associate with the Underground Railroad. So one of the things we need to remember about the Underground Railroad in Texas, it did not run to Canada, it ran to Mexico. Mexico had outlawed slavery in 1829. There was a big fight in 1836. Some of you may know that date. And because of that fight, Texas won its independence, became an independent nation, and delayed freedom to the enslaved people for another 29 years. So by winning their independence in 1836 and joining the Union on December 29th, 1845, they continued the expansion of enslavement in the Texas territory because of all the land. The largest enslaver in the state of Texas was Robert and David Mills, two brothers. Their house, Robert Mills' home, was at where Kempner Park is. His brother David stayed in Brazoria County. They owned 850 enslaved people. So Galveston was very important to the commercial commerce, and the largest enslaver, Robert Mills, lived here, and they owned 7 plantations, 4 in Brazoria County, 2 in Matagorda, and 1 in Fort Bend County. All of this is important to the Juneteenth story, because when you go onto the website, the Texas State Historical Association website, and you read about Mills, it says that he freed 800 slaves in 1865. Well, that's a very nice sentence, and it's nice the way they wrote it, but he didn't just voluntarily free 800 people. That was a little war that caused him to have to do that. So we need to tell the full story. After Harriet Tubman, getting back to the imagery, you have Abraham Lincoln in the center. Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which did not free enslaved people in Union territories. It only applied to states in rebellion. So Union states that had enslaved people did not free them. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation did not free them. And the Confederacy would not recognize Lincoln's authority, so therefore they were not planning to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. And contrary to popular opinion that the news was late, the news was not late. References to the Emancipation Proclamation were printed in at least 125 newspapers between 1862 and 1865. So no messenger on a horse got shot or anything like that. The truth of the matter is the Confederacy had no plans of enforcing the Emancipation Proclamation or freeing the enslaved people unless the men with the guns showed up. A friend of my grandmother's, attorney Faye Williams, many of you may know her, said her grandfather used to tell her that it wasn't a piece of paper that freed the enslaved people of Texas, but the men with the guns. And the men with the guns that he was referencing were the soldiers in blue uniforms, many of them in brown and black bodies, 75%, 3 out of 4. So Granger is in the next portal. He's signing General Order number 1. We did not, if you go by the mural, you'll see the number 1 instead of 3. And the reason being is because he signed 1 and 2. And then Emory, like I said earlier, signed 3, 4, and 5. Behind him are the men standing, the USCT with 4 colored troops and 1 white soldier behind him. The next portal is the March Toward Absolute Equality. This is the Juneteenth flag, and individuals still in pursuit of this absolute equality. The iconic image of Galveston, the Hotel Galvez, is on the bottom there. We needed something. And in the top right corner is
but it's okay. It's him.
Yeah.
does not mean equal results. Absolute equality is creating an environment in which every individual can become their very best self. So that by becoming their best self, we improve families, communities, neighborhoods, cities, counties, state, country, and world eventually. So that was a big rap ad that we did a couple of months ago on May 31st, Memorial Day. Miss Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth, is coming to Galveston to do her 2.5-mile walk from the seawall at 2702 seawall down to the Strand Juneteenth marker and mural. This is a great opportunity for Galveston to highlight this work and to host Miss Opal, who is 94. She says everyone under 94 is young people. So that includes me at 50 now. We also have the 2020 National Miss Juneteenth, Sanaya Gay, coming to Galveston. She's 18 years old. She's from Delaware. Last year was the first National Miss Juneteenth. Because of the pandemic, it was limited participants, but those that showed up competed and she won, and she will be here in Galveston, visiting Galveston for the very first time. So we're excited about her coming. We're also excited that Galveston is going to host the National Juneteenth Conference in October of 2022. This year's conference is going to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but next year in 2022, we're going to roll out the carpet to the national network of thousands of Juneteenth financial directors and planners. That now all of them may not come to Galveston, but the reason we host it in October is because all of them have local events in June. So we have an opportunity in October to do an event where the Juneteenth directors and planners come. So here is the finished product of the mural at 22nd and Strand. If you have not seen it, they started on March 9th. They ended April 13th. It is absolutely amazing and beautiful and something that Galveston should be very proud. We're in the New York Times today. In addition to the mural, we will have augmented reality where you'll be able to use your smartphone to point at the mural and videos will pop up. There are already several historical markers that are using this. The Jack Johnson marker, Juneteenth marker, and Battle of Galveston have 3 videos already linked that if you download the app and go stand in front of the marker, a video, this video is of me speaking at the Texas Sports Hall of Fame Museum in Waco. So this community project is heritage tourism, preservation, community engagement with youth, adults, schools, businesses, artists, historians, tourists, locals, and it has become an outdoor classroom. This couple was from Santa Barbara, California. They are quoted in the New York Times article today. They were here visiting for the first time and they're planning on coming back. They were amazed by the mural. This couple was from Brooklyn, New York with their family. They were here and they just happened to walk down the Strand and randomly walked up on the Juneteenth marker in the mural. They had no idea that they were standing on what is considered by some sacred ground, but they were so happy to meet me and I shared more of the history with them. Of course, this is Marina Walney and some of the Mitchell family. They have been very supportive of the project. There are several documentary films being done on the project right now, at least 3 documentary films that I know of. One will be virtually viewed on June 5th. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. So I hope that something was said. Let me stop this share. I want to get back to, let's see if I can get the, we have raised $401,000 for our project. So we hit our goal of 400,000. If you've made a donation, thank you. If you still want to donate, you can go to the site and still make a donation. All right, if there are any questions, voila. I went over a couple of minutes. I apologize for that.
I have a question. What's the name of the app that you use with the markers?
It's Uncover Everything. And I'll go back and pull it back up for you all.
Thank
It's
you.
Uncover Everything. page first.
Sam, this is Dan Freeman. I want to say this is a remarkable achievement you have, and it's interesting that this is a wonderful complement to another figure that's thousands of miles, over 1,000 miles away, the Augusta St. Gaudens Monument to Robert Gould Shaw on the Boston Common.
Oh, absolutely. It
And
took him
these-
30 years to do that. And I'm glad it didn't take us 30 years, but I've been there to visit it. It's beautiful.
You have done a beautiful job to complement that, and this is much more of a community thing than that one was. But that both will make me weep when I see them.
Thank you. I hope that this will be a storytelling space where we can continue these conversations to do the repair work. So I don't know if y'all can still see my screen with the New York Times article. Is the screen still sharing there? Yeah. So this is the New York Times article that came out today, May 23rd. So we're getting international interest in this story, and we have a great opportunity to highlight our island and be an island of success and an island of accomplishment. So we have so many stories that need to be told. John Rufus Gibson, an educator that committed over 5 decades of his life to the children and community here in Galveston. That's not so much as a postcard in his memory. They tried to change Central High School to Gibson High School in 1935, but it was not approved. We have stories of Jesse McGuire Dent, Jack Johnson. We need to be an island of success. I'm not ignoring the past and the history, because it also needs to be talked about. Behind the paint, underneath the asphalt, are the fingerprints of the enslaved and former enslaved that molded the clay to build the buildings and to lay the streets here in Galveston. And the economic prosperity that we experience today is built on the backs of those 850 people that Mills owned and others that helped to bring this economic prosperity to the island. So I do want to acknowledge that history, and we need to talk about it. But I also want us, because when we don't talk about success and when we don't talk about those that fought for this freedom, we leave out an important part of the story, and some individuals start to believe that they are the only ones that are patriots, or they are the only ones that sacrifice for this country, or they are the only ones that ever built anything. You know, I try to find ways to equate the story to get people to understand. My oldest daughter took the SAT 3 times. She finally beat my math score the 3rd time, and she called me. She was so excited. "Daddy, I beat your score." I said, "Well, sweetheart, now you're the math king." She said, "No, I'm the math queen, Daddy." And my biases as a male caused me to go straight to math king when I should have said math queen. So all I try to point out when giving this example is that we all have biases. I love my daughter. I want her to be accomplished. So I hear people say, "Well, I'm not racist. I don't believe that kind of stuff." But sometimes we have biases that we don't even see because we have not identified those. And once you identify those, change behavior. I see one hand from Mary.
Yeah, I like the way you talked about the meaning of absolute equality. Would you speak a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So when we think about equality, too often people think we're asking for equal results of outcomes. What we're looking for is that every individual should have an opportunity to develop and become their very best self. So right now, there are students that don't have good internet access. And how are they going to learn virtually if they don't have internet access? So the president of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation that works nationally with me is coming to Galveston Memorial Day weekend, He's helping me to get a $180,000 grant to provide Wi-Fi access on the north side of Broadway over in areas that don't have it. So, you know, we need partnerships to make all of this come together. And so by helping individuals become their very best self without hurdles or barriers put in front of them, allows our communities to become better communities. And that's what absolute equality is about. Not that we expect everyone to have the same result, but we want everyone to have the same opportunity to become their very best self without hurdles being put in front of them or barriers holding back their development.
Sam?
Sandra?
Oh, yes, thanks. I wanted to just tell Sam how educational I think those hidden history episodes that have been you've been doing with the Bryan Museum, and maybe you can speak a little bit about that. You mentioned Jesse McGuire Dent and forget Jack Johnson. Those were 2 episodes, but some of the episodes are just I never, as much as I thought I knew, I learned a great deal more. So I
can speak to that for a second.
encourage other people to, yeah.
So James Baldwin has a quote in The Fire Next Time: "These innocent people are trapped in a history they don't understand." So much of this information is out there and it's recorded, but just like I spoke about John Rufus Gibson, nobody ever talks about him in Galveston. This was an amazing individual. He was the first subject that I did of hidden history on the Bryan Museum website, Hidden History Series. And again, one of my goals was to highlight success and accomplishment because there are so many stories. Like, people don't know about Matthew Gaines and George T. Ruby, Black legislators that helped to establish Prairie View A&M University and Texas A&M University. So anyone that benefited from an Aggie education, which I did, so we owe it to Matthew Gaines and George T. Ruby, who pushed for public education. Many individuals don't know that during Reconstruction, it was these former enslaved individuals. Gaines was a former enslaved individual, and Ruby was a freedman that eventually came to Galveston, but they pushed for public education. What we have today, they didn't have that same system back in 1860s, 70s, and education was more for the elite. But the former enslaved knew that their children needed education, so they pushed for public education. So these stories are hidden. It's like acres of diamonds underneath our feet here in Galveston. Galveston has something that nobody else has. Number one, they have the intersection of 22nd and Strand. Then they have all of these success stories that nobody's talked about. And we need to highlight them and not just highlight suffering and pain. We talk about the suffering and pain because it's part of the story, but we also need to talk about the accomplishment and success. And one of my goals with the Bryan Museum was to try to get them to tell more positive stories and get all of us to tell more positive stories of individuals that contributed to the success of this island, to the success of Texas, the success of our country and our world.
Steve, you have a question?
Okay. You mentioned earlier the old Central High School. First of all, what is the background story? I didn't know that there was an attempt to change the name of the high school back when it was still being used as a high school. And the other thing is, the first time I saw the building, I saw some shocking writing in bold-faced capital letters, which said, which said Rosenberg Library Colored Branch, which obviously is a reference to Jim Crow. And so I'm wondering if the bold-faced capital letter writing has anything to do with the attempt to change the name of the old high school, and what's the story on that?
Okay, so the story behind Mr. Gibson, some think he was the first principal of Central. He was actually the second principal. He started his principalship in 1888, and he remained principal till 1936. Yes, 1888 to 1936, 48 years.
Sam, you've lost your audio.
We heard about the 48 years. What did you say after that?
All right, so I'm back now. See my little window highlighted. In 1935, they petitioned to change the high school to Gibson High School, but because of the time period, they would not put someone black or colored name on the building, and they refused to do it. And again, he came here in 1882, and he became principal in 1888. He came from Wilberforce University, and I believe he had met one of Miss Collins' ancestors that told him about Galveston, because he also went to Mr. Skull, went to Wilberforce, graduated, and came back to Galveston. So I believe that's how Gibson got here. So anyway, they would not change the name of the school. That colored branch of Rosenberg Library is up there. I don't think we need to take it down. I think we need to teach this history. So we have the Confederate monument in the courthouse square. Our county is very red, so that's very unlikely that it would be taken down. So I talked to the county commissioners about adding 4 new monuments, 3 of them being United States colored troops, and 1 of them being the white officer, Major Frederick Emory. They like that idea. They're working on it right now. I already have designs and layouts for the courthouse square, so that we could turn it into an outdoor classroom. I believe if you erase the name off the building, if you take down the monuments, what happens, it kind of erases the sin of what actually happened. And I think we need to deal with it and not just bury it. So it's a different perspective. Do I wish the Confederacy had won? Of course not. Am I gonna go hang on the statue and celebrate? No, but what we need to do is, how do we reimagine the space to teach the truth of what happened, to repair the foundation so that we can save this American house that we're all living in. Additional questions? Stephen, was that enough, or do you need me to give you a little more on Mr. Gibson? Because I have a whole presentation.
The question I have about the building, which obviously is a reference to the fact that the library in Galveston was not integrated for a considerable period of time. And what year did they integrate Rosenberg Library so that people of all races could use the same library? When did that happen?
I don't have an exact date, but I believe it was the early 60s. One of the things that Attorney Faye Williams shared with me, this oral history is so important, is that when you wanted a book from the Rosenberg Library, if you were a Black resident of Galveston, you can have the book delivered to the colored branch, but you had to sit in the library and read it. You couldn't take it home. So you could bring it over to Central High School, and the librarian would allow you to sit in the library and read the book. So when we think about segregation, and when we hear the conversations about reparations and things like that, people think way back to slavery times. But there is history more recent of the biases with segregation and American apartheid, basically, of why people were still harmed. Because Attorney Faye Williams, she couldn't take a book from the Rosenberg Library home. She had to sit in the library at the colored branch and read it only inside the building. So you think about how that restricted individuals' development. So when we talk about absolute equality, simply taking a book home, they couldn't even take the book home and read it. They had to read it in the library. So how much time do you have in the library? You only could be there when the library is open. So yes, we're thankful that Mr. Rosenberg set aside funds that allowed them to open the library. But even with the colored branch of the library, there were restrictions. And it wasn't until probably the 60s that individuals were free to go into the main library to use the resources at that library. Many of the documents that I put in into the documentary film that I'm doing are
So Sam, we've lost your voice again. We've lost your audio.
story has been told in one direction. I see the internet is messing up, so hopefully I'll come back soon. But while the story has been told from one point of view for 40 plus years, many individuals didn't have access to these records and newspaper reports to tell the truth or tell the rest of the story. So, you know, we're thankful that now that we can get these primary source documents and share them with the public and tell the truth of what happened. If we want to heal, we must tell the truth. I'm not angry about it. I don't have time to fight. You know, now that I'm 50, I don't know how much more time I have. But I know more than likely, most of my days are past me, and I have to do the work right now so that the house that my children and future grandchildren live in will still be here, and it'll be a better house without the problems that I've had to deal with the windows not being able to go up and down because the foundation has shifted, pipes busted. We're going to repair this house. So, other questions?
Marty?
Madeline?
Marty had one too, Mary.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Marty first and then Madeline.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to know whether the Underground Railroad went to Mexico.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When you look at the map, it's a much further walk to Canada, and the weather's cold. So the enslaved people would have definitely went south, because once they cross the Rio Grande, they're in freedom. So, you know, I was taught to remember the Alamo from a different perspective. I should have been pulling for Santa Anna. But again, if Santa Ana had won, things would be different, and I probably wouldn't even be here because life would have been different between 1836 and now. So we can't go back, like Maya Angelou said, we can't go back and change that, but how do we work today to tell these stories? The other thing I want to mention that I forgot is the events that are coming up. June 5th, the Rosenberg Library will have the virtual viewing of the documentaries, Juneteenth, at 6 p.m. On June 19th, they will have the Ashton Villa celebration at 10 o'clock. And then we'll have our mural dedication at 11:30. And at 4 o'clock, the University of Houston is hosting an event at the Grand where we will dive deeper into this conversation about Juneteenth and the USCT for an hour at the Grand with historian Joseph McGill, who's coming in from South Carolina. And they have a festival from 2 to 7 o'clock. But if you can tune in virtually on June 5th, we'd love for you to view the documentary, which is about 40 minutes long, and then to come out and celebrate with us at the mural at the intersection on June 19th at 11:30. So there may be some overlap between Ashton Villa and the mural event. And I just want to, while we're recording, say to everyone, this history or attempt to expand the narrative is not an attack on Ashton Villa or the Juneteenth story that others have been sharing for so many years. I want all of the stories and events to be supported, because what is interpreted at the site is something that happened all throughout the state. What is interpreted at Ashton Villa about Granger. There's no documented evidence that Granger had a public reading at 22nd and Strand or Ashton Villa. But in many places across the state, enslaved people would have been gathered and the news would have been shared. There's no reason for us to allow 10 blocks to divide the community of what story is most important. What is most important is that we do the repair work to the foundation to create a better city and a better community today. What is important is the message of freedom came to Galveston because Galveston was so important to Texas history and so important to the economy, the Southern economy, west of New Orleans, Galveston was it. I don't even like saying the New York of the South. Galveston was the Galveston of the South. We don't need to be anybody else. We don't need to be New Orleans. We don't need to be New York. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the movie Black Panther came out and everybody wanted to go to Wakanda and believe in a make-believe hero. We have real heroes in our community, people like Gibson, Jack Johnson, Jesse McGuire Ditt, George T. Ruby, Richard Nelson. I could go on and on of people that have not been celebrated. My great-grandmother, who I don't believe went past 6th or 7th grade, she lived to 104 and 10 months. There will be no buildings named after her, no streets. But if not for her sacrifice of the way she lived her life, I would not be speaking to you today. Her name was Clyde Johnson, Mama Dear. And she was the foundation of our family. And she came to Galveston in 1925, and she stayed here until she passed away in 2012. She was 2 months from being 105 years old. So we don't need make-believe places. We have Galveston forever. So no Wakanda, it's Galveston. Galveston forever.
So there was another question?
Madeline.
Yes,
Madeline?
I had a question about, you were talking about the Underground Railroad to Mexico because slavery had been abolished in Mexico. So just a minute, my dog's gonna bark now. So during the period before we won our independence in 1836, are you saying that those Black people who were working on plantations in Texas before 1836 were not actually enslaved, and they became enslaved after we were no longer part of Mexico?
No, so what I'm saying is when the settlers came into Texas, Mexico had told them, okay, you can come. We're going to let you in, immigrants. We're going to let y'all come. You need to learn the language. You need to convert to our faith, and you need to free your enslaved people within 5 years. Like after 5 years, you got to cut this out, stop it. So this is early 1820s with Stephen F. Austin. So from 1824 to 1829, settlers are coming in, they're supposed to free their enslaved people. They don't want to do it. So that begins the arguing between 1829 and 1836 of, okay, we're telling you, you need to do this. And Texas is saying, no, we're not going to do it. So they would bring them in as what they called indentured servants, but really they were bound enslaved people for the entire period. So by 1836 is when you have the big fight, and they lose at the Alamo, but Sam Houston wins at San Jacinto, and the rest of the story is history. So had Santa Anna won in Mexico, it came up, the enslaved people would have been freed earlier. So yes, they were held as slaves in the 1820s, and after 1836, then Texas began to expand. And Texas wasn't really doing well between 36 and 45. That's why they ended up joining the Union. They needed help because they had fought this war and they were in trouble. So how we tell the story about our Lone Star State and our independence and our exceptionalism is somewhat slanted also. I'm proud to be a Texan. I'm proud to have been born on Galveston Island. But I also know that there's more to the story than what we learned in our history books in junior high, high school, and college. Because no one ever told me in all the years that I went to Juneteenth celebrations that 75% of the Union forces were United States colored troops. No one spoke to their strength. No one spoke to them being men and freedom fighters and patriots. And in 2015, I had a reenactor come and tell the story about the USCT, but even at that time, I didn't know how much of a force they had been. And I stand on the shoulders of people like Harry Jones and other historians that have been trying to tell this story for decades, but nobody would listen, and they would not include it in the classroom. And it was intentionally suppressed to think that certain subsets of individuals are here and dependent and need to be taken care of. But I'm reminded of Frederick Douglass's July 5th speech. And if you have not read it, I would encourage you to go back and read Douglass' July 5th speech. What to the slave is the 4th of July. It's an amazing speech. Read Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. There have been people for hundreds of years and decades trying to tell these stories, but until last year, people were not open to hearing it, and people get very defensive. As a situation with me and my daughter, I could have said, well, you know, I'm a man, you know, I can't have this woman with a higher score than me. That's ridiculous. Of course, I want her to be successful, and I want to support her in her accomplishment, and I want her to do well. But I had to recognize my own biases, even though I love my daughter, that the first thing I went to was Math King, even though I should have said Math Queen. And she is the Math Queen. So if I need help with my homework, I go to her. She didn't beat me by that much, though. I just want to put that on the record. And I did tell her, if I would have known I was competing with a child 25 years in the future, I would have took it more than one time. So I took her 3 averages, and I told her, your average score was not better than my average score. But she said, no, it's best score, Dad. You can't do that. But I said my average was higher than her average, because she had to see the same questions 3 times. I would not have sat through that test 3 times, no matter what. But she was determined to beat my score that much. So when we think about this history, you go back. On the technology. So if someone has showed me the Hidden Figures when I was 6 years old, I would have believed that women were more successful in math and science, that they contributed. But because I didn't have that positive imagery in my mind, it allowed me to grow up with a cracked foundation. And that's the work that I think we need to do. So there are not enough stories about women. In March is Women's History Month. Galveston needs more historical markers to tell the story of women that contributed, not just the founding fathers, but the mothers that contributed to this island too.
You have a couple more questions. Dorothy?
I missed the series, the Hidden History series at the Bryan Museum. Is there a way to get access to them?
Absolutely. They're all recorded. If you go on the Bryan Museum website, you can go to their Hidden History tab under Education, and the previous recordings are available for you to go back and watch. That was one on John Rufus Gibson, Jesse McGuire Dent, who sued the Galveston School District in 1943 and won equal pay. Black teachers were getting 20% less than white teachers. She sued Galveston ISD and was able to win. And over 3 years, they had to raise the pay of the Black teachers, which led to those teachers spending more money in the stores here on the island, and it led to more economic prosperity. So Jesse McGuire Dent, Jack Johnson, and then there are some professors that have added additional hidden history lectures. Dr. Caleb McDaniel from Rice University, and I can't think of the name of the others, but they're all listed on the Bryan Museum website.
Thank you. Anyone else? Linda?
I saw Mitch had a question too after Linda.
This is my daughter.
Hi, I'm visiting. I was listening to you, and I wanted to say that I heard of a couple of stories that relate to what you're talking about that I never knew about. One was there was Boy Scouts on the island for 100 years, and in the 1930s, the newspaper for the first time published an article about 35 Black Eagle Scouts, the highest award you could earn, and it was very controversial. And the Scouts also, they would have a summer camp every year for weeks and weeks, like 6 weeks during the summer here. And the train would take them to the mainland to do their camp. But the Black Scouts, they had to camp their own week, the last week, only Blacks by themselves. And you don't hear stories like that. So unless you know the history. And so the local council here was trying to, learn the history. And yeah, It's all over.
Absolutely. So Mr. Gibson was excellent in everything he did. It was his Boy Scout troops. So these 35 Eagle Scouts, just think about what that meant to the island, that this accomplishment has never been celebrated.
That's right.
That needs to be celebrated.
Yeah. And the other story I heard recently was there's a new Jean Lafitte book, and it turns out Jean Lafitte, everyone's heard of the pirate and everything, and they think there's this treasure and all that. But truth be told, he was more like a kind of a gangster back in the 1800s.
Exactly.
He his biggest money making business was selling slaves. So you don't hear that side of the Jean Lafitte story unless you're really, really into the history. And why not, you know? So
America had outlawed the international slave trade in 1808. So Galveston was an illegal port for slaves being brought in from South America and through the Gulf. So they would buy people for $34 on the African continent. Maybe in Cuba, they could get them for $300. And by the time they got to the coast here, they could be sold for $1,000 or $1,200. So this is kind of later on. Early on, maybe they were sold for $200, $300 into New Orleans and into Louisiana. But Galveston was a major slave port, and the largest auction house west of New Orleans was on the north side of the Strand in the 2200 block. John Seabrook Sidner owned the largest auction house there. So this is all, the city of Seabrook is named after, you know, him, and he was a mayor of Galveston. That's so people don't want to talk about this history because they feel, you know, some of it will shine a bad light on Galveston. But if we're going to do the repair work, we need to tell the truth so that we can move forward. And I think there's a fear that, oh, they're going to want reparations or our family's going to have to pay. I think what we need to look at is that don't be afraid of the truth, because the truth will set us free and it will help us to become a better country. So I know that Mitch had a question too.
Well, I'm a big fan of history. I read a lot of history, and I really want to say I really appreciate you keeping that story alive. I live in Texas City. You're familiar with the settlement district here and that group. They've come and shared their story with our genealogy club, and it was just fantastic and interesting. The old black cowboys, many of whose relatives still live here. And just about what you mentioned, I tell people that real history is like a chocolate eclair, and the history that you get in the school books is like a Hostess Twinkie. It's just been industrialized and sanitized to where it is like useless. So I'm really glad you're keeping this story alive.
Sam, let me just interject here. We've just thoroughly enjoyed this wide-ranging topic, and we're enthralled with your answers, your history, all this information. Let's just close the service, and then we can continue this as long as people have questions. Would that be all right?
Yeah, I have some people meeting me downtown in front of the mural. We were going to take a picture today, but because of the weather, we canceled the group photo. But some of them have shown up and they're texting me. So I will stay on with you for another 10, 15 minutes, but I'm gonna have to get down. Y'all are welcome to come down to the mural, and I'll be down there. If you have more questions, I'll stay down there. We have that Suite 101. We don't have any real furniture in there, but if you bring your chair and you want to sit down and continue the conversation, it would be the perfect day for me on my birthday to continue this conversation in person if you feel safe enough to be around other people. I've been vaccinated, and if we could be inside out of the weather if it starts raining in that Suite 101. So y'all are welcome to meet me down there. I already have on my Juneteenth Legacy Project shirt. So.